Welcome to our look at the history of teenage success on the WTA Tour. Of course, 18-year-old Emma Raducanu's run to the 2021 U.S. Open singles title, not one any of us are going to be forgetting anytime soon. She became the first teenage champion in New York since Serena Williams back in 1999. Of course, that 99 final holds particular weight in this conversation, as that was the last time two teenagers went head-to-head for the crown in New York. On that occasion, it was Serena knocking off world number one teenager Martina Hingis in 2021. It was Raducanu knocking off fellow top 100 teenager 19-year-old Canadian Leylah Fernandez. Of course, Raducanu, Fernandez, two of six teenagers currently in the top 100 of the WTA singles rankings. You've got joining them Coco Gauff, who's won a WTA title this year, quarterfinalist at the French Open. The 17-year-old American has been sensational early in her career. You've got former world junior number one Clara Tauson, won her first two WTA level titles this season. She's right about top 50 now in the WTA singles rankings, clearly one of the ascending players in the women's game. You've also got two other accomplished teenagers you may not remember, but Maria Camila Osorio Serrano, she won her first WTA level title this season. Marta Kostyuk, the hard-hitting Ukrainian, dangerous against any opponent when she plays her best tennis, was a fourth round for her in Paris this year. There's a lot of teenage talent in the women's game, and of course, after the runs of Raducanu, Fernandez in New York, all of us are wondering, how does this group's success compare to those of the WTA Tour's past? How do these players compare to some of the greats we've seen emerge in WTA Tour history? That's the question we want to answer with this video series. Of course, on this video, I want to dive into some of the success seen in the past, talk about the runs of players like Monica Seles, talk about the runs of the Martina Hingises, the Serenas, the Sharapovas of the world, who set the standard for what is possible as a teenager. But of course, I then want to break down each teenager individually, talk about the highlights from their resumes thus far, talk about how their numbers compare historically to some of the players I'm going to bring up in this segment. You can hear me break it all down in one long-form podcast on the Great Shot podcast feed, or you can stick around here on our Cracked Racquets YouTube channel for each individual video. With that said, let's talk about some of the greats we've seen in tennis's past. And of course, the place you have to start when you're talking teenage success is Monica Seles. She's got essentially all of the records, folks. She won 8 Grand Slams as a teenager. 8 Grand Slams. We're all excited about Raducanu's run. She won 8 Grand Slams, made 9 total finals in 14 slams played as a teenager. She won 88% of her matches against top 100 opponents. Now, that would be impressive regardless of sample size. When you realize she did it over about 250 matches, it becomes that much more impressive. 103-27 against top 20 opponents. That was Monica Seles, a 79% win percentage. Here's the most crazy stat. She played a grand total, I believe, of 63 events as a teenager, 63 total tournaments. She made 46 finals in those 63 total events. That's a 73% win percentage. She also won 32 titles in her first 63 events on tour. That's a 51% win percentage. She won over half of her events as a teenager. And of course, tragedy strikes Monica Seles so early in her career, and it was a prime robbed from us. The greatest what if in tennis history. What does Monica Seles' prime look like if tragedy doesn't strike? How does that impact the career of course, one of the greats who ascended in the 1990s in Steffi Graf, who Seles just seemed to match up so well with early in their careers? It's a fascinating question. Unfortunately, one will never get fully answered as tennis fans. That said, you look at what Seles was able to accomplish. I mentioned 63 total events, 57 quarterfinals in 63 total events, an absurd 256-31 record. That's an 89% win percentage. That's the best amongst any teenager in WTA Tour history. Monica Seles, she's the gold standard. You know who else was outstanding? The aforementioned Martina Hingis. You look at Hingis's numbers, 372 and 77. That's an 83% win percentage as a teenager. She played 24 total slams, made 17 quarterfinals. Again, as a teenager, she wins 5 titles, makes 5 other finals. So 10 finals in 24 slams, all before turning age 20. She's, I believe, 157 and 58. That's a 73% win percentage against top 20 opponents. That number trails just Seles in the leaderboard. You look for teenagers. Those two, the golden standards. Of course, you know who else was sneaky good? And if you're ever going to make a case for Maria Sharapova over Serena Williams in something you're going to make the case for it as a teenager. You look at what Sharapova was able to accomplish. She was able to win 2 slams, 2 Serenas, 1 slam title. She made 3 finals, 2 Serenas, 2. And again, across the numbers, Sharapova, slight edge. You look for her overall win percentage. Sharapova won 81% of her matches. Serena won 80. You look for her total win percentage against top 20 opponents. For Sharapova, she won 74% of her matches. Serena won 73%. You look just in terms of total titles during that stretch of time. Maria Sharapova, 14 titles in her first 63 events as a teenager. Serena, 10 titles in 49 events. Slight edge goes to Sharapova. But of course, again, that's the gold standard. Just to read you some of the numbers, overall win percentage, Seles number 1, 89%. Hingis is 2 at 83. It then goes Sharapova, Serena, and then you get to Raducanu and Tauson. Raducanu 77%, Tauson 76.7%. They're 4th and 5th overall in win percentage as teenagers. Now, the sample size, a lot smaller. The level of competition, one could argue, less rigorous as they've had to go ascend up the ITF rankings. For Serena, for Sharapova, for Seles, for Hingis, it was thrown to the wolves at the WTA Tour level. But of course, the depth in women's tennis is something that stands out. And so again, when you start to look at these teenagers, they get in that neighborhood. You see Iga Swiatek, who only recently turned 20. She's in that over 75% neighborhood as well. Joining them are players like Justine Henin, Jennifer Capriati. Those are some of the best of the best. And of course, they're right up there in the mix. They're on pace, above the Venus Williams of the world, the Wozniackis of the world. Of course, you look for Raducanu. It's still such a small sample size, but given the age restrictions, the success that she's had, round of 16 at Wimbledon, final in Chicago, title at the U.S. Open, it feels real. And the numbers are comparable. Now, of course, you look for all of these players. They are on the lower half. While they're above players like, Simona Halep and Karolina Pliskova. And by the way, it's worth noting, Halep, Pliskova have been top 5 players for the majority of their careers. They weren't the successful teenagers you see for Karolina Pliskova. She never played in a major. She didn't have a top 20 win as a teenager, and yet she's gone on to an outstanding career. Certainly, you look for Simona Halep. She was winning less than 50% of her tour-level matches against top 50 opponents as a teenager, and then she hit her stride physically in her early mid-20s and kind of catapulted from there. Caroline Wozniacki was outstanding as a teenager and was able to sustain that level for so long, and yet you see players like Tauson, Raducanu, Andreescu, Coco Gauff, who's still 17, on a similar pace. These teenagers aren't quite at the Seles, at the Hingis, Serena, and Sharapova level of teenage success, but Swiatek, Andreescu, Raducanu, and a 17-year-old Gauff who still has 2 more full seasons as a teenager, they're absolutely on pace. And so again, that's your overview of the teenage success. I will go through each individual current teenager, and again, there are 6 of them in the top 100. I'm going to talk about them being Raducanu, Gauff, Fernandez, Kostyuk, Osorio Serrano, and Clara Tauson. But of course, if you're curious in any individual, you can click right on that video. And again, the full long-form podcast you can find on the Great Shot podcast feed. But with that said, that is your introduction to the history of teenage success on the WTA Tour.